Welcome to our presentation on head and spine injuries. In this lecture, we will explore the anatomy, common injury mechanisms, types of injuries, assessment techniques, and emergency medical care related to head and spinal trauma. Let's begin. Head injuries result from trauma to the skull and brain, ranging from minor soft tissue damage to severe traumatic brain injury. These injuries are responsible for more than half of all traumatic deaths and often occur in conjunction with other injuries. Prompt recognition and management are crucial for patient outcomes. Head injuries can be classified as closed or open. A closed injury means the brain is injured without an external opening, while an open injury involves a break in the skull, potentially exposing brain tissue. Open injuries often result from penetrating trauma and require careful management to prevent infection and further damage. Falls and motor vehicle collisions are leading causes of head injuries. Additionally, they can occur in cases of assault or during high-impact sports. Recognizing the mechanism of injury helps predict the severity of the head trauma and guides pre-hospital care. Here is a table that lists the general signs and symptoms of a head injury. Scalp lacerations can range from minor to severe, with even small cuts causing significant bleeding. In some cases, scalp lacerations indicate deeper injuries, including skull fractures or brain trauma. Bleeding control and thorough assessment are essential in these cases. Skull fractures occur when significant force is applied to the head. They can be either open or closed, depending on whether there is a scalp laceration. Skull fractures often result from high-energy impacts such as gunshot wounds, blunt force trauma, or falls from height. Recognizing the signs of a skull fracture is essential for effective treatment. Signs of a skull fracture include deformities of the head, visible cracks in the skull, and characteristic bruising patterns such as raccoon eyes or battle sign. Raccoon eyes refer to bruising under the eyes, while battle sign appears as bruising behind the ear over the mastoid process. These signs suggest potential brain injury and require urgent medical intervention. This slide illustrates the signs of a skull fracture, including raccoon eyes and battle sign. Raccoon eyes are a result of bleeding from a basilar skull fracture, while battle sign indicates posterior skull fractures and possible cerebrospinal fluid leakage. Linear skull fractures are the most common type, accounting for about 80% of all skull fractures. These fractures are difficult to diagnose without radiographic imaging, as there may be no obvious external signs of injury. Depressed skull fractures occur when direct, high-energy trauma to the head forces bone fragments inward, potentially damaging brain tissue. These fractures most commonly affect the frontal and parietal bones. Immediate medical intervention is required to prevent complications. Basilar skull fractures result from high-energy trauma and typically occur due to diffuse impact to the head. Signs include cerebrospinal fluid drainage from the ears, raccoon eyes, and battle sign. These injuries require urgent medical evaluation due to the risk of brain infection and increased intracranial pressure. Open skull fractures often involve trauma to multiple body systems, making them particularly severe. In these cases, brain tissue may be exposed, increasing the risk of infection and complications. Open skull fractures have a high mortality rate and require rapid medical intervention. Traumatic brain injuries, or TBIs, are among the most serious types of head injuries. They can be categorized as primary injuries, which occur at the moment of impact, and secondary injuries, which develop due to ongoing physiological changes, such as swelling, hypoxia, or bleeding. Secondary brain injuries can be caused by hypoxia, hypotension, cerebral edema, intracranial hemorrhage, increased intracranial pressure, ischemia, and infection. Managing secondary injuries is a critical component of pre-hospital care, as they can significantly worsen the patient's condition. The brain can be injured directly by a penetrating object or indirectly due to external forces. A common example is the coup-contre-coup injury, which occurs when the brain strikes the inside of the skull upon impact, then rebounds and strikes the opposite side of the skull. This type of injury is common in motor vehicle collisions. Cerebral edema, or brain swelling, may not develop for several hours after the initial injury. Low oxygen levels can worsen cerebral edema, making it important to maintain adequate oxygenation. Patients should also be monitored for any signs of seizures, which can indicate worsening brain injury. Intracranial pressure, or ICP, increases when there is bleeding or swelling inside the skull. This pressure compresses brain tissue against the rigid structures of the cranium, which can cause further injury. Without proper management, increased ICP can rapidly lead to brain damage or death. Signs of increased intracranial pressure include abnormal breathing patterns such as Cheyne-Stokes respirations and ataxic respirations. Other signs include decreased pulse rate, severe headache, nausea, vomiting, altered mental status, bradycardia, and widening blood pressure. This combination of increased blood pressure, slow heart rate, and irregular respirations is known as Cushing's reflex. Intracranial hemorrhage, or bleeding inside the skull, can also contribute to increased ICP. Bleeding can occur in three main areas: between the skull and dura mater, beneath the dura mater but outside the brain, or directly within brain tissue. Each type of hemorrhage presents unique challenges and requires rapid intervention. An epidural hematoma is the accumulation of blood between the skull and dura mater. This is often caused by a blow to the head that results in a linear fracture of the temporal bone, damaging the middle meningeal artery. Epidural hematomas can rapidly increase ICP, leading to serious neurological deterioration. A subdural hematoma occurs when blood collects beneath the dura mater, but outside the brain. These injuries are often the result of falls or deceleration forces. Subdural hematomas may or may not be associated with a skull fracture, and their symptoms can develop more slowly compared to epidural hematomas. Intracerebral hematomas involve bleeding within the brain tissue itself. These injuries may occur after penetrating trauma or rapid deceleration forces. The severity depends on the size and location of the bleed. Intracerebral hematomas can cause progressive neurological deterioration and require immediate medical intervention. A subarachnoid hemorrhage involves bleeding into the space where cerebrospinal fluid circulates. This type of injury can result from trauma or the rupture of an aneurysm. Patients may present with bloody cerebrospinal fluid and signs of meningeal irritation, such as a stiff neck and severe headache. A concussion is a type of closed head injury that temporarily affects brain function. It may cause an altered level of consciousness, but does not always result in loss of consciousness. About 90% of concussion patients remain awake, though they may experience confusion and difficulty concentrating. Patients with concussions may exhibit confusion or amnesia. Symptoms typically resolve within a short period, but repeated concussions can have lasting effects on brain function. It is important to monitor the patient for worsening symptoms that may indicate a more severe brain injury. Common symptoms of a concussion include dizziness, weakness, visual disturbances, nausea, vomiting, ringing in the ears, slurred speech, and difficulty concentrating. Patients should be closely observed for any changes in their condition, as worsening symptoms may indicate a more serious brain injury. A brain contusion is more severe than a concussion and involves actual physical damage to brain tissue. Contusions can lead to long-lasting or permanent neurological deficits. Signs of a contusion include altered mental status, loss of consciousness, and signs of increased intracranial pressure. Brain injuries can also occur due to medical conditions such as blood clots or hemorrhages. Non-traumatic brain injuries often present with the same signs and symptoms as traumatic brain injuries, including altered mental status, headache, and neurological deficits. Spinal injuries can result from compression forces, hyperextension, or flexion. These injuries can cause vertebral fractures, herniated discs, or damage to the spinal cord. Motor vehicle collisions, falls, and sports injuries are common causes of spinal trauma. Excessive motion or abnormal bending of the spine can lead to fractures or neurologic deficits. Hyperextension, lateral bending, and rapid acceleration forces can all contribute to spinal injuries. Patients with suspected spinal injuries should be handled with extreme care to prevent further damage. Always suspect a possible head or spinal injury in patients involved in motor vehicle collisions, pedestrian accidents, falls, or blunt trauma. Additionally, penetrating injuries to the head, neck, back, or torso should be carefully evaluated for potential spinal involvement. Other situations that should raise suspicion of spinal injury include rapid deceleration incidents, hangings, axial loading injuries, and diving accidents. A thorough assessment is necessary to determine the severity of the injury and ensure appropriate management. There are 3 general principles for managing head injuries. First, establish an adequate airway. Second, control any bleeding and ensure proper circulation. And third, assess the patient's level of consciousness and continuously monitor for changes. The jaw thrust maneuver should be used to open the airway in patients with suspected spinal injuries. Once the airway is secured, maintain the head and cervical spine in a neutral position until a cervical collar can be applied. This slide demonstrates the proper application of a cervical collar, which should be done immediately after completing the primary assessment. Proper cervical spine immobilization is essential to prevent further injury. Managing the airway is a priority in patients with head injuries. Remove any foreign bodies, secretions, or vomitus that could obstruct the airway. Ensure that the patient's breathing is adequate and provide supplemental oxygen as needed. Oxygen is crucial for preventing hypoxia, which can worsen brain injuries. Circulation must be assessed and managed carefully. If the patient is in cardiac arrest, begin CPR immediately. Active bleeding can significantly worsen hypoxia and increase the risk of shock. Scalp lacerations often bleed profusely, but direct pressure is usually sufficient to control bleeding. However, avoid excessive pressure if a skull fracture is suspected. Shock in patients with head injuries is typically due to hypovolemia. Signs of shock indicate a critical condition requiring immediate intervention. Transport the patient quickly to a trauma center where they can receive advanced care. Early recognition and treatment of shock improve survival rates. Cushing's triad is a classic sign of increased intracranial pressure. It consists of increased blood pressure, decreased heart rate, and irregular respirations such as Cheyne-Stokes or Biot respirations. Managing these patients involves administering oxygen, providing ventilatory support if necessary, and avoiding hyperventilation unless directed by medical control. When treating spinal injuries, always follow standard precautions. Maintain the patient's airway while ensuring spinal alignment. Assess respirations and provide supplemental oxygen if needed. Remember that spinal injuries can impair breathing by affecting the nerves that control the diaphragm. The jaw thrust maneuver is the preferred method for opening the airway in patients with suspected spinal injuries. Avoid head tilt chin lift unless spinal trauma has been ruled out. If necessary, insert an oropharyngeal airway to maintain airway patency. Keep a suction unit available to clear secretions. This slide illustrates the correct application of the jaw thrust maneuver. One rescuer stabilizes the neck in a neutral position, while another pushes the lower jaw forward to open the airway. This technique is crucial for preventing additional spinal damage while maintaining a patent airway. Spinal motion restriction is essential for preventing further injury. Immobilize the head and trunk to minimize movement. Never force the head into a neutral position if resistance is met. Instead, immobilize the patient in their current position and transport them with caution. Cervical collars provide partial support and should be applied to all patients with suspected spinal injuries. It is important to use the correct size for an effective fit. The collar should rest on the shoulders and provide firm support under the jaw without obstructing the airway. Once the cervical collar is in place, assess the patient's pulse, motor function, and sensation in all extremities. Evaluate the cervical spine and neck for signs of injury. Manual stabilization should be maintained until the patient is fully secured to a backboard or vacuum mattress. Patients with suspected spinal injuries should be secured using a long backboard or vacuum mattress. The four-person log roll technique is commonly used to transfer a patient onto a backboard. Always ensure proper spinal alignment during movement. Vacuum mattresses are an alternative to long backboards. They conform to the patient's body shape, providing excellent support. These devices are especially useful for elderly patients or those with spinal deformities. Vacuum mattresses can be used for patients in various positions, including supine, sitting, or standing. For sitting patients, use a short backboard to stabilize the cervical and thoracic spine before transferring them to a long backboard. However, there are exceptions where immediate removal is necessary, such as when the patient is in danger or has critical injuries requiring rapid transport. Standing patients should be carefully transitioned into a position that allows for spinal motion restriction. Indications for spinal immobilization include spinal tenderness, altered mental status, neurological deficits, obvious spinal deformity, and high-energy trauma in an intoxicated or distracted patient. Spinal immobilization devices should be used for all patients with suspected head or spinal injuries. Techniques such as manual inline stabilization, cervical collars, and long backboards help minimize movement and prevent worsening of injuries. Short backboards, including vest-type devices, are designed to restrict movement of the head, neck, and torso. These devices are commonly used for non-critical patients found in a sitting position, such as those involved in motor vehicle collisions. Long backboards provide full-body spinal immobilization, including support for the head, neck, torso, pelvis, and extremities. They are used to immobilize patients found in any position and are a standard tool for spinal motion restriction. Helmets can provide spinal support and should generally be left on unless they interfere with airway management. If the helmet does not obstruct treatment and spinal motion restriction can be maintained, it is best to keep it in place. A helmet should be removed if it is a full-face design, makes airway management difficult, prevents proper spinal immobilization, allows excessive head movement, or if the patient is in cardiac arrest. In these cases, helmet removal should be performed carefully by trained personnel. Helmet removal should always be a two-person procedure to minimize cervical spine movement. If possible, consult with medical control before removing the helmet. Proper coordination between rescuers is crucial to prevent unnecessary neck movement. An alternate helmet removal method allows for less forceful removal, reducing the risk of spinal movement. However, this technique is slightly more time-consuming. The priority is to protect the patient's cervical spine throughout the process. To remove the helmet, follow these steps. First, remove the chin strap and face mask. Next, carefully pop the jaw pads out of place. One rescuer stabilizes the head, while the other gently slides the helmet off. Place padding behind the occiput to maintain spinal alignment. The rescuer positioned at the patient's chest is responsible for preventing any movement of the head and neck during helmet removal. In pediatric patients, additional padding may be required to maintain a neutral spine position.